Hey everybody, it's Greg Martin here. Strap on in and put on your big boy pants. It's time to listen to Pop Goes Your World with Derek Myers and Chris McBrien.
If you haven't already, subscribe on iTunes. And while you're there, please leave us a rating and review.
And now it's time for our feature presentation.
I'm Chris McBrien, and the pop culture from Generation X is everything to me.
And I'm Derek Myers, and I'm here to educate Chris on the great pop culture of today's generation.
Episode 268, Stand-Up Comedy. I'm Chris McBrien, along with Derek Myers, and this is Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations. Now, this week, we're going to take a look at stand-up comedy over the years, how it's evolved, and stand-up films and specials, and how they've sort of transitioned into the streamers and all that. But before we get to that, Derek, what pop culture have you been able to take in this past week, my friend?
Hey, Chris. I've actually had a chance to take in a fair number of things.
Okay.
I've noticed that when the weather's nice, I tend to ride my bike outside in the summer. But when the weather's crappy, it gets a little colder, it gets a little wetter, I ride my inside bike. Well, when I ride the inside bike, I always have something on the screen in front of me. So I get through a lot of stuff in the winter. In any case, I had a chance to watch a brand new movie that just dropped on Disney Plus this week. Mm-hmm. It's a movie called No One Will Save You. It's billed as a horror movie, but it's a PG-13, so it's not that scary. And it stars Caitlin Dever, who was I recently just talked about her. She was in a movie called Booksmart that I sort of said was like the female version of Superbad, and she was the female lead, the young girl in Dope Sick with Michael Keaton that we talked about.
I feel like you mentioned that last week or the week before.
Yeah. So yeah, because I just watched Booksmart with her in it a couple of weeks ago. Anyway, she's the lead in this, and the sort of the gimmick or the pitch for this movie is that there's no dialogue. It's not a silent movie, but there's no dialogue. The movie's 90 minutes long, and she has like one tiny little outburst in one part where she says a couple of words. It's like 3 or 4 words. But other than that, you've got this 90-minute movie that's this horror movie with no dialogue. And when you sort of know that's the gimmick and you start watching, you're like, okay, let's see where this goes. And it works. It was pretty good. It was very clever the way it came together. And I really liked it. It's, it was, again, horror's not really my genre, but.
No, you don't like horrors. Yeah.
No, it wasn't that scary, but it's PG-13, right? So you can only get certain amount of violence and gore and stuff. But no, it was sort of a tame horror movie, but it was an interesting movie watching experience. So if you've got Disney Plus, I think it's on Hulu in the States. It's about 90 minutes. I liked it. It was a good one. And then I had a chance to watch a couple of older ones, old by my standards, new by your standards.
Okay.
Today I had a chance to watch the 2017 release The Mummy, starring Tom Cruise. And you got to think, well, Tom Cruise, he knows how to make a movie. Yeah, this one, not so good. I'd heard the reviews were and I thought, well, I was really struggling to find something good to watch, and I thought I'll give it a chance. What I didn't realize was this movie was supposed to be the kickoff of a new franchise. So it was from Universal, and they basically were branding it as Dark Universal. And it was supposed to be the Mummy and the Wolfman and Frankenstein, like basically all the classic monsters. And so they were setting it up. This was supposed to be the first in a series. And no, there's a reason that there's only one. It was not that good. So if you haven't seen The Mummy with Tom Cruise, I would say don't waste your time. If you want to see a good mummy movie, go back and watch the one with Brendan Fraser. You'll be
I was going to say, was this like a remake of Brendan Fraser's Mummy movie?
Nothing related whatsoever. No, it draws from those classic movies from like the 40s and 50s, like the old black and white monster movies. Like that's the inspiration for it. But anyway, not great. Now, I had a chance, I have a long list of things in my Amazon account that I have on my wish list that I just sort of price watch. Because from time to time, things go on sale that you don't expect to go on sale, and you can save a lot of money. And so
you do like the penny pinch.
I do. And there's a whole bunch of Blu-rays that I'm like, well, I wouldn't mind owning this, but I'm not paying full price for it. And one of the things I've had on my wish list finally went on sale for half price, and it was the complete Blu-ray collected editions of all 6 Alien movies. So Alien, Aliens, Alien 3, Alien Resurrection, Prometheus, and Alien Covenant. You get all 6, all on Blu-ray with all the special features, and it was going for $60, which I said, no, I'm not paying that. Went on for half price, $30. I bought it in a heartbeat, free shipping, showed up the next day. So my wife and I decided to go back and start rewatching all these movies on Blu-ray and beautiful Blu-ray on our big screen. And so we started with Prometheus. Even though it's not the first movie that was made, it is the first movie chronologically, because it sort of does that Star Wars thing where they decided to go back and make some prequels to the movies that actually were the first ones. So we went back and we watched Prometheus from 2012, directed by Ridley Scott, who directed the first Alien movie, and it's sort of the beginning of that Alien franchise. And there was a lot to like about it. It looks fantastic, and it looks even better on this Blu-ray on the big flat screen. It was beautiful to watch. It's got a great cast. It's not a great movie. It's not a perfect movie by any stretch of the imagination. It has its flaws, but there was a lot to like. I hadn't seen it in a while, and I thought it held up pretty well. So Prometheus got the 2 thumbs up. If you haven't seen it in a while, it's worth going back and take another look. Chris, I assume you have not seen any of the Alien movies except for the 2 that we watched on this podcast?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah.
That would be a good assumption to make.
Yeah, safe assumption. All right. And then finally I had a chance to watch a documentary.
For 40 days and 40 nights, he watches documentaries. He likes to learn about the world. It's Derek's Documentaries. Derek's Documentaries.
Please do tell.
All right. So on CNN, they actually do some pretty good documentaries on CNN. And this one had aired a couple months ago and I missed it. And then they repeated it a couple of weeks ago and I managed to get it on my recorder. I watched it this week. It's basically the life story of Little Richard. It's called Little Richard, I Am Everything. And it was amazing. Let me tell you, I like Little Richard's music, but I didn't really know anything about him. And this was a full biography from birth to death. Honestly, I didn't realize he had died. He died in 2020. I don't know if it was related to COVID or not, but it was fantastic. Oh, my God, it was so good. And it was... the whole history of how he got into music and the challenges he faced, and then he found religion and he, obviously being a gay performer at that point in time, and the persecution that he faced both as being a person of color and a gay person, and then he had an about face when he found God and he denounced his homosexuality and the problems that had for both him personally and the gay community, but all along the whole idea of just how influential his music was on absolutely everybody that came after him. The Beatles, the Rolling Stones, Elvis Presley, all these people that you say, oh, these are the founders of rock and roll. It's like, no. Little Richard was the founder of rock and roll. All those other people were influenced by Little Richard. Don't kid yourself. This documentary is fantastic. And if you think you're a fan of Little Richard and you don't know his story, you do yourself a favor. Go and watch this or dig into his past. Go on YouTube and watch stuff about him. Like, he led a fascinating life. And man, oh man, that man talented. So it was 2 huge thumbs up. If you have a chance to watch it, if it comes back on CNN, the Little Richard documentary, it was amazing.
Derek, you and I actually had the opportunity to get together this week.
We did indeed, to celebrate someone's birthday, which we mentioned on the last show.
Yes, because I'm now Wilford Brimley and Cocoon old, as we know. But anyway, so you and I and our wives, we all got together and we attended the world premiere of 299 Queen Street West, which is a documentary directed by Sean Menard, and it basically chronicles the origins and history of Canada's 24-hour music station, Much Music. So the United States had MTV, but up here in Canada, we had Much Music. And I got to tell you, Much Music was another example of Canadians being better than our American counterparts when it comes to pop culture. So MTV was obviously trailblazing. It proved that a 24-hour all music, video channel could, not only survive, but it could thrive, right? But Much Music here in Canada was a little bit different. The VJs, the on-air video jockeys, as they were called, in Canada on Much Music, they were all raw, they had little to no background in broadcasting or radio or television. Erica M. was a famous VJ here in Canada. She was the receptionist in the office, and they just threw her on the air. like she really struggled, and like most of them did, right? But that was the key to it all, I felt. The VJs weren't the stars. The musicians and the music was the star. In the States with MTV, the VJs were like, they were made out to be the stars. Because they had Carson Daly and Nina Blackwood and Downtown Julie Brown and Pauly Shore and people like that. But on Much Music in Canada, the VJs were almost like a surrogate for the viewer. You know, like they interviewed the musicians, and I think just because they were so raw, they were able to get the musicians to really open up and just be themselves. And it didn't hurt that they were in Canada too, I think, because the musicians figured like, what the hell? No one's watching. I'll just say whatever I want, you know? So it's like I say, Derek, we got a chance to meet up. We had dinner before, and then we hit the premiere, and we weren't seated together. So when we got to the venue, we went our separate ways, and I was with my wife in the left parterre. The parterre, Derek.
Ooh, the parterre. Somebody had good seats.
Yeah, it's a fancy term for the section along the side. You know, under the box seats. I
was in the balcony, which is a fancy name for nosebleeds.
I think above us in the box seats were Statler and Waldorf. Actually, I believe we're up there.
Yeah.
But anyway, I don't know if they were up there, but I do know that who was beside us. So we get in and we sit down and we're like, going to start watching this. And my wife is like, she's whispering to me. She's like, look beside you. Look beside you. Look. And so I turn and I look. It's Corey Hart, the musician.
Nice.
And he's sitting
was
there
he wearing sunglasses?
Funny enough, he was not, and it was at night.
Well, how did you possibly recognize him?
Exactly, a little shocking.
At night?
So you like, you know, he's there, and he's got his son and his wife with him. So I didn't say a word to him. You know, like there's no way I was going to bug this guy. You know, but it was just a great experience. I really had a good time. I'm really glad we attended the premiere. You love documentaries. I love Much Music. My wife loves Corey Hart. It was like a success all around. You know?
Yeah. No, and I really liked it. Personally, I thought that it was a little longer than it needed to be, but given what it was, I'm totally willing to forgive that. And for those people listening who may be interested in actually seeing it, they're doing a cross Canada tour to promote it. I think it's got 10 or 15 stops over the next couple of months. And then right around Christmas time, it's going to be available on Crave here in Canada. So if you've got Crave, you can just hold out a couple more months. It'll be on. And once it is, strongly recommend you take a look at it. It was really good.
Yeah, it was. You know what else is good? This.
Here's your dad joke of the week.
Derek, I thought, you know, we're doing stand-up comedy this week, so I should do a stand-up comedy dad joke. Would only be appropriate.
Of course.
Okay, so Derek, why don't stand-up comics take steroids?
Oh, geez. I have no idea.
Because they need balls to get on stage.
Jeez. Nice.
Apparently taking steroids makes your balls shrink, I guess.
Apparently.
I was in the pool.
Happy pandemic-versary.
Don't be ridiculous.
Okay, well then, have I got a show for you?
Oh yeah, because I watch that shows so much.
I can't wait for you.
Oh, that's right up your alley.
30 bags of potato chips and 12 bottles of liquor.
So this looks like something that would be up my alley.
I'm doing crappy. How you doing? You're like, I'm doing crappy too.
I want it to end. I want them all to go to jail.
We need to lock you up for telling that joke.
I think that would be best.
All right, so we're going to talk about stand-up comedy. But before we do, and before we get into our top 5 list of our favorite stand-up comedy, like films or specials, it's probably good to put things in context. You agree?
Absolutely.
Talk a little bit about stand-up comedy and the history of it. It's been around forever. Literally, if you believe Mel Brooks' History of the World Part 1, they had stand-up philosophers.
Stand-up philosophers.
Yeah, back in ancient Rome. But stand-up comedy, like as an art form, it's like an American thing, really, because it probably started out, you know, in the early to mid 1800s in the U.S., like with minstrel shows, and then with vaudeville and the Chitlin circuit. And stand-up comedians like Bob Hope and George Burns and Milton Berle all came from vaudeville, right? And people like Moms Mabley came from the Chitlin circuit. The Chitlin circuit, if you don't know, was a lot of the venues where African Americans performed, because basically like the black vaudeville, right? And that stayed strong right through the 80s. It gave Tyler Perry a vehicle for his work, I remember. But stand-up comedy has had this huge part to play in pop culture. Not just Gen X, but like right up until today, right?
Absolutely.
Like it's been a big part of American culture. So I think it's worth going back and just kind of putting things in a frame of reference before we get to our top 5. And remember, this is going to be our top 5 sort of personal stand-up comedy videos or specials, or I don't know what you call them. Anyway.
Yeah, well, we can get to that when we start going through the list.
One person I want to talk about is Lenny Bruce. So the thing is, anything, we've mentioned this before, anything that's sort of significant in pop culture, it's not created in a vacuum. You know, everything's influenced by something that came before. And a lot of the stand-up comics that sort of ruled in Gen X, like if you think about guys like George Carlin and Richard Pryor and guys like that, they all owed their success to Lenny Bruce. Like, so if you're not familiar with Lenny Bruce, he was a stand-up comedian back in like late 50s, early 60s. And he basically ushered in all that counterculture, you know, comedy that came in. This guy broke all the rules. Like, so back then, they actually had obscenity laws. Like, you could not swear on stage. And not only could you not swear, you couldn't talk about politics or religion or sex. So Lenny Bruce comes along and he basically broke every law every time he got on stage. Like, so in 1964, he was arrested and he was tried and convicted for breaking obscenity laws. And his trial became like this, almost like a lightning rod, you know, for the debate around freedom of speech in the United States. And he died of a drug overdose in 66. They made a biopic about him in 74, I think it was called Lenny, with Dustin Hoffman.
Yeah, I was going to say, Dustin Hoffman in it, yeah. No,
I'm
familiar with it. I've not seen it.
Yeah, he was nominated for an Oscar for that. So if it wasn't for Lenny Bruce, a lot of the comedians that followed never would have been able to do what they did. You know, I mean, it didn't take all that many years after Lenny Bruce's trial, you know, before swearing and talking about sex and religion and politics, it was basically became mainstream. But he was the trailblazer. So he paved the way. So I think he deserves a lot of recognition for that. So he was one guy I wanted to mention.
Chris, I'm just looking it up here.
Yep.
The movie Lenny is available for free on the Tubi network for anyone who hasn't seen it that might be interested in checking it out. So, like you, I'm a big fan of stand-up comedy. I go out to see professional stand-up comics probably once a year, twice a year. When we travel, like I go to Vegas a lot. We usually try and not every time, but a number of times we've gone to see some professional stand-ups. Again, you get somewhere like Vegas. These are people that are usually big names, well-known, have established material. In some cases, they're like older performers that there's that nostalgia factor. But even in most places, you have like a place where amateurs or up and coming comics can go. I mean, here in Toronto, we have Second City and we have like Yuck Yucks and Just for Laughs. There's all these different places. And I'm sure that there are, if not those brands, the equivalent thereof in most big cities. And I mean, it's hit or miss, right? You sort of get it's like any other art form. You're not going to love it all. It's like music, for example. You're not going to love all genres of music, but you can certainly appreciate the ones that you're not wild about. Like, I'm not a huge fan of country music, but I grew up listening to it because that's what my parents like. So, like, I can appreciate it even if that's not my first choice of a musical option. And I find it's the same with stand-up comics. The different comics tend to do different shticks and they go in different directions. Some tell jokes, some tell stories, some share experiences from their life. And, you know, you get a sense of which ones you're most likely to enjoy. But it's always a good time. I can't recall the last time I went to a comedy show where I didn't have a good time. Even if some of the comedians were terrible, you usually still have a pretty good time. It's a fun outing. And it's not easy. Not that I can speak from personal experience, but I've seen a lot of documentaries over the year. You know me, I love documentaries. And there's been a lot of documentaries recently, like in the last 5 or 10 years, about the history of comedy, the history of stand-up, the history of sitcoms. And actually, I think it was, if I remember correctly, I think CNN did a couple of series on the history of comedy. So a lot of what you were talking about rang true for me because I remember seeing them recently. But I've known people that are performers like you that have, you know, done some stage, done some theater, done some performing. I even know some folks that have tried stand-up comedy, and everyone I know that's tried it has said it is the most difficult thing that they've ever attempted. And, you know, my hat's off to you for anyone who has been brave enough to go in front of an audience and try it. It's something that I've never wanted to do myself because I can only imagine how horrible it would be if you crash and burn. But that's I guess part of the appeal for people who are trying to get into it, right? There's got to be an amazing rush to doing it successfully. But the thing that I'm constantly hear when I read up on it or I watch videos on it is it's all about persistence. You got to just keep trying it over and over and over and over. Even people like someone like Jerry Seinfeld, who was probably, one of the most successful stand-up comedians in the last 30 or 40 years, managed to parlay it into one of the most successful TV shows, sitcoms of the last 30 years. I can remember seeing things with him where he's just like, you go out night after night after night after night, you just keep refining the material. And like you said, it's an American art form, and it's a lot harder than I think people realize.
Well, yeah, because I've done a lot of improv in my life, and I love improv because I can react to other actors and play off them and kind of build things. But stand up, you are on your own, and I've done stand up before, and it is hard. And you also have to be really good at reading the room. Like, you have to be able to read the whole room. You need to have 100 jokes, and you go out on stage planning to do 50 of them, and reading the room and figure out which ones work, which ones don't, and just pivoting on the spot. It's really hard. One thing I wanted to mention is female stand-up comedians, because like a lot of things in the 19th and 20th century, stand-up comedy was male dominated.
Yeah.
Right?
The boys club, for sure.
Well, the idea that a woman would get on stage and tell jokes, come on, right? It was not even something people think would even happen. And the Friars Club in New York, which was this huge comedy club, right? And that's where they had all those roasts and all that stuff. The Friars Club didn't even allow female members until 1987. Wow. Liza Minnelli was the first female allowed to join the club.
Jeez.
And at when they had the roast of Sid Caesar back in 1983, Phyllis Diller had to sneak in, disguised as a man, just to get in there.
Wow.
But a lot of female comedians really started to emerge on the comedy scene, like Phyllis Diller, like I mentioned. Joan Rivers is another one. Those two really sort of broke through with mainstream audiences. But that was back in the 50s and 60s. In the 70s, Elaine Boozler, man, she would go out and slog it night after night after night and go across the country and do it when no other women were doing it. And then you had Roseanne Barr and Ellen DeGeneres, they really kind of broke through, but still it was a lot of men. It was a hard slog for women. You got to give credit where it's due.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I remember, the performer Jamie Foxx tells this story a lot when he was first starting out because he started as a stand-up comedian before he went into TV and movies and became an Oscar winner and all the rest of it. When he was doing stand-up, he said that the places where he would go, they were always on amateur night. They'd always put the women up before the men. And so whenever he was there and they were always making up stage names for themselves, he would always use a first name that could be a man or a woman's name, because that would give him a stronger likelihood of getting up before the other comedians. So that's part of the reason his stage name is Jamie Foxx, because Jamie can be both a male or traditionally is a male or female name. And I've seen interviews with him where he rhymes off 20 or 30 pseudonyms that he tried, and all of them are names that would work either way. And it's definitely a reflection of the era. This would have been the late 80s, early 90s he's talking about when he was sort of breaking into it. And the fact that there were not a lot of women performers, and that they clearly were having a hard time finding an audience, and they weren't being given the same opportunities as the men. And so, they had to put the women on before the men, kind of thing.
So we've been doing this for 8 seasons, this podcast, and we have not really touched on stand-up comedy until now. So we thought it would be worthwhile to put together a top 5 list of our favorite stand-up, I guess you call them films or specials or whatever you want to
I'm going to call them,
specials.
Some of them are full on, and films. I think we haven't compared lists, but we sort of, with this one, I basically said, I'm going to take more of the newer angle and you're going to take more of the older angle, which I don't think will come to a surprise as anyone who's heard this show more than once before.
That's kind of what we do.
I suspect some or all of the ones on your lists are possibly things that even had theatrical releases if they're older. Everything on my list. Everything on my list is from streaming, because the oldest one on my list is 2000, and most of mine are from the last 10 years. But
there'll be no crossover. No worries.
No, I don't think there will. So, but before we actually jump into doing our list, a couple of things I wanted to just mention that we've talked about before, or I mean, I've mentioned it before. Humor is difficult, as we've been saying, but I find that humor changes. Like what people find funny will change with the times because it's in part your relationship to the material. And you and I were just talking about this off air where we were talking about South Park. And I said, like, some of those first seasons of South Park, which at the time were so edgy and controversial, and you think this was great. This is, the first season of South Park. That's how they became who they are. And you go back and you watch it now, and like some of the humor that's in there is kind of cringy now because what was considered edgy or racy back then is now just considered straight up inappropriate. And I think that, and we talk about this when we review old movies all the time, but I think with things like stand-up comedy, that's you really start to get into that, where stuff that was deemed exceptionally funny and in the moment does not always hold up that well. And I think that's, obviously, culture changes, times change, and you sort of need to be mindful of that as you're sort of going through it. And I think one of the things that we'll probably discuss is definitely as we go through my picks is as the world we've lived in, at least in the last 10 to 15 years, has started to become more self-aware and has started to recognize disenfranchised groups that are often the punchline of jokes or traditionally have been the punchline of jokes. You start to see some of the older comedy just doesn't stand up. It's inappropriate. You don't make certain kinds of jokes anymore. You don't use certain groups as a punchline. We always talk about Revenge of the Nerds. Well, the joke is that the guy's Chinese. Ha ha ha. Let's laugh at him. Like, that's not going to fly today, in part because I don't think your today audience is going to find that funny. And it can become, I got to think it's going to be exceptionally difficult in today's day and age for today's comics to find a way to push the envelope and be funny without offending someone. And I think that that's a real risk and a real challenge. And a couple of people on my list, I'm going to go into more detail on that about. So anyway, before I dive in, I just want to mention two comedians that are not going to be on my list that I want to just give a quick shout out to as sort of a recognition because they are both very popular. I just personally don't care for them that much. And I'll tell you sort of the pros and cons. So the first one I want to mention is Jim Gaffigan. He's an American comedian. His material is very family friendly. He's got, I want to say, like 5 or 6 children, and like he's been doing his stand-up for like 20 years now, and all of his material relates to his real life experience and being a dad and having these kids and all the rest of that. And for me, I don't have kids and I don't go to church, and like, his lifestyle and my lifestyle in the sense of like, he's a dad and he's got all these kids and stuff. I just find with his material, I have a hard time relating to it. I don't find it funny because I've never experienced the kinds of things he's talking about. And so much of what humor is finding a common thread with your audience and then maybe giving them an unexpected turn. And that's where the punchline often comes in, something that's unexpected, and then everybody laughs, or they sort of go, ooh, yeah, I shouldn't have done that. But Jim Gaffigan's made a very good career for himself, being a very clean stand-up comic, and a lot of people love him, and he puts out new material pretty frequently, like probably every year or so. And if you punch him in on Netflix or Amazon, you're going to find a dozen specials. I've watched a few. There's always a few things in there that I can find funny, but I find for me personally, for the most part, I just have a hard time relating to his material because it doesn't speak to me. But had to, I think, acknowledge him as a very popular, very successful working comic in today's era. The other one I want to mention is Ali Wong. You were talking about female comedians. Okay. Again, I mean, take what you will as this says about me, but honestly, I generally don't find female comedians funny. And I think, again, it's because I have a hard time relating to the material. I think female comics have realized that the way that they can succeed where male comics can't is talking about the female experience. And so, again, my wife will watch a female stand-up comedian and laugh herself silly. And I'll say to her, well, I heard you laughing a couple hours ago in the other room. What were you watching? And she'll tell me, and I'll go watch the same thing and watch for a full hour and not laugh one bit because it doesn't speak to me. Ali Wong is one that I do find pretty funny. Again, I wouldn't put her in my top 5, but the women that I spoke with this week when we were talking about stand-up comics as our topic, they said you have to mention Ali Wong. So I'm going to give her a shout out. Again, she's got a couple of specials that are readily available online. So if you're looking for a very funny female stand-up comedian and you are not familiar with Ali Wong's material, check it out. You'll be pleasantly surprised.
Nice. Okay, so let's dive into like our list of like specials or films or whatever we want to call them. Start with your number 5 and we'll work our way up. What do you got?
So my number 5 is possibly one of my more controversial. I mean, I'm going to have a few sort of controversial ones. So I'm going to go with a staple here. I'm going to go with one of the giants in the industry for the last 20 years. I'm going with Dave Chappelle. Love him or hate him, whether you loved him and now you hate him, whether you didn't like him before, you love him now. He's been polarizing. He's edgy. He speaks his mind. He comes across as incredibly intelligent and well-spoken, in my opinion. I've always found his material funny because I find that, I've said it before, the real money's dick and fart jokes. Dave Chappelle doesn't do dick and fart jokes. Dave Chappelle finds a way to almost provide more highbrow comedy, but he does it at a very sort of lowbrow level where it can really appeal to a broad audience. Obviously, he made his bones as an African-American speaking to the black audience, and that was his in. That was how he started. And he continues to share, his life experience as a black man in America, but he talks about politics. He talks about current events. He talks about, societal issues and problems. He does a lot of stuff, obviously, about race, being a black man and being married to an Asian woman. He lives in Ohio, which is, primarily, a white state. It's a red state. It's, so his brand of politics may not necessarily jive with his neighbors, and he's used that in his material. But he has been tremendously successful. He has made a tremendous amount of money over his career. Just looking on his Wikipedia here, it talks about he has won 6 Emmy Awards and 4 Grammys, as well as the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor, which is presented by the Kennedy Center as America's highest comedy honor. So, when you're talking about the Hall of Fame of stand-up comedians, Dave Chappelle's in there along with, so many that came before him. I know in the more recent years, he's been he's had some routines and he's done some bits where he's made comments about the LGBT community, which have not sat well with a lot of people. And so I think people who maybe have been fans of his for a long time are sort of reconsidering him. I watched the specials that sort of generated all the controversy. I can understand. Well, I think I can understand why, some people were having some problems, but I've seen some of the material he's put out after that, and I would still consider myself a fan of his work. I definitely like his older work, probably a little better than his brand new stuff. But as far as my actual entry as my number 5 is, I got to go with his very first special on HBO. It's from 2000. It's called Killing Them Softly. It's still available online, and go to the beginning. That's before he had Chappelle's Show. That's before he had all these Netflix specials. That's before he was hosting Saturday Night Live. Like this was his coming out party, and he's never been better than he was in 2000. So my number 5, Dave Chappelle.
I know him from Chappelle's Show, and some of that stuff was really funny. Yeah, he was good. Okay, my number 5, Dana Carvey, Critics' Choice. So I think it's easy to forget how talented Dana Carvey was. If all you know about him was that he was like Garth Alger or the Church Lady, head on over to YouTube and just look up Dana Carvey, Critics' Choice. It's available there for free. So in 1995, he was obviously coming off this hugely successful run as a cast member on Saturday Night Live, because he was in the cast from 86 to 93. And then he got his own stand-up special on HBO, which was Critics' Choice. So he comes out on stage, he opens it up, and he's like working the audience for applause. He gets them like super loud and quiet, and then loud and quiet. And then he just kind of gets into his stand-up act, and where he just does all these impressions. Like, he was so good at impressions, especially politicians. He does like George W. Bush and Ross Perot, and he does this whole routine about the O.J. Simpson trial, which again, very dated, but back then it was so funny. But the thing I liked about it is he basically does an impression of every lawyer and everybody around the trial. And he does them all like so well. And then he does other stuff. Around that time, Hugh Grant got pulled over for being with a prostitute by police. And Dana Carvey does this impression of what would it be like if Cary Grant back in the day got pulled over when he was with Katharine Hepburn. And he just impersonates them, and it's just so funny. And then he's talking about what it's like having young kids, which is a really funny bit, I thought. And at one point, then he picks up a guitar, and then he gets on the keyboard, and he plays that Chop and Broccoli song and everything. I think there's a little bit of everything, a little bit of something for everybody in that. And I think he was really a massively talented guy. And so I really like the stand-up in Critics' Choice, so that's my number 5. So over to your number 4. What do you got?
Nice.
Are you familiar with that one?
I'm not. I've honestly, I was never really a big fan of Dana Carvey on Saturday Night Live, and possibly just because he was overshadowed by so many other great performers. Honestly, the comedians that do impressions, I've never found that entertaining or funny. I can appreciate the work that it takes to do it well, but for me, it's just never been a thing. And that was his whole shtick, is look at how great he is at all these impressions. Okay, well, that's just not my brand of humor. But anyway, I'll take a look at it. Sure,
yeah,
why not?
It's good.
All right. For me, number 4, I'm moving to something a lot more recent. A comedian who's still working. I'm going with Anthony Jeselnik, and I'm going to talk about his 2019 Netflix special called Anthony Jeselnik, Fire in the Maternity Ward. Okay. So for those of you who may not know him by name, I'll just read you a little blurb here about his deal. It says he is known for his dark comedy style, which emphasizes ironic misdirection, non sequiturs, biting insults, an arrogant demeanor, and a stage persona that frequently takes amoral or sociopathic stances. He is basically, by definition, the most insulting comedian you can have. He offends everybody equally, deliberately, to basically get a reaction. That's his thing. And he's been doing it for 15 years. He had his own TV show for a season that eventually got canceled because it was too edgy and there were some issues. And he's one of these performers that basically is deliberately pushes the envelope because he can. And it's so over the top that no one in their right mind would believe the things he's saying are real. Like I can see how on its face you might think, oh, well, that guy's a complete jerk. He's a misogynist. He's a racist. He's a whatever. But the more I watch this comedian, the more I watch the stand-up, the more I believe, and maybe I'm incorrect with this, that it's clearly an act. It's clearly a stage persona that, he's had to try and separate himself from a large field of other people trying to do the same thing. And, oh my God, it's both over the top and filthy and hilarious. At least I find it that way. And I found that a couple of the guys on my list are like this. It's the dirtier they are, the more inappropriate they are, the more they can take what you think is funny and make it inappropriate and then bring it back around to make it funny again is a real talent. And so Anthony Jeselnik's got a couple on Netflix right now. His most recent one, I believe, is this one from 2019. It's called Fire in the Maternity Ward. So check it out.
All right. So my number 4. So Derek, when we were talking about the history of stand-up comedy, I was talking about the Friars Club, right? And they used to do these celebrity roasts back then, like from 74 to 84. Mm-hmm. Like Rich Little and Foster Brooks and Buddy Hackett, would be there. And one of the funniest human beings of all time, in my opinion, Don Rickles. Oh my God, that guy was so funny. Oh my God, he was funny. But then in the late 90s, early 2000s, Comedy Central brought back these roasts. I'm sure you remember the format. They'd pick like a celebrity roast and then he or she would sit in a chair. And then all these other people would do stand-up routines where they just ripped on the person. It was so good. So lots of celebrities got roasted, but the best one ever was in 2006. It was the Comedy Central roast of William Shatner. And that's my number 4.
Nice.
So like I say, by the time they got around to him, these new roasts had a few people that were like regular roasters. Okay, there was Jeff Ross and Greg Giraldo and Lisa Lampanelli. And then they were surrounded by other celebrities like George Takei. You know, oh my, we like him.
Yep.
Oh my.
And Jason Alexander and Fred Willard. But did they ever rip into Shatner? It's so funny. So some of my favorite quotes from this. And the thing is, they don't just rip into Shatner. They rip into each other too. So Betty White's there, and then Lisa Lampanelli gets up there and she says, Betty White is so old that the prize on her first ever game show was fire. I thought that was good. And then Betty White gets up and she says, I caught the bouquet at William Shatner's wedding. I just hope I'm around to catch the at Sulu's. And I'm like, oh my God. And then Takei gets up there and he's like, he goes, Betty White, Lisa Lampanelli, Farrah Fawcett. It smells like in here. I think.
Oh my.
So they just rip on each other. So it just made me laugh so much that these people would just rip on each other so much. So I don't know. This one might be number one. Like, I just can't get over how mean everyone was and so dirty. But I think it's more shocking than anything, I guess. And so that's what made it so funny. But it's my number 4. So what do you got for number 3?
All right. I'm doing an audible here. I'm crossing off my original number 3 and I'm putting something else in because as we've been talking, it sort of reminded me of something that I felt this show would be, lacking something significant if it didn't have it in here. And so I want to throw it in. So I'm going to throw it in at number 3. And it's the 2005 film, The Aristocrats.
Oh, yes. Great one. Great one.
All right. So for those who maybe are not familiar with this, I'm just going to read you the little blurb here that I just pulled up online. So it says, the movie is basically over 100 different comedians telling the same joke. And so this is what it says here. The joke involves a person pitching an act to a talent agent. Typically, the first line is, a man walks into a talent agent's office. The man then describes the act. From this point, up to but not including the punchline, the teller of the joke is expected to ad-lib the most shocking act they can possibly imagine. This will often include elements such as incest, group sex, graphic violence, defecation, coprophilia, necrophilia, bestiality, rape, child sexual abuse, and various other taboo behaviors. The agent then asks, what do you call your act? Followed by the punchline, The Aristocrats. And so this documentary, it's basically a documentary, if you want to think of it that way, where they give you the history of how this joke came about in vaudeville. Like, it goes way back, and it's almost like a secret handshake between comedians where when comedians get together, this is sort of their measuring stick where they say, well, what's your version of The Aristocrats? Well, what's your version of The Aristocrats? They don't
perform it on stage. It's just a backstage thing for each other.
Exactly. Yeah. It's a very sort of inside baseball kind of thing. And so this movie, this documentary, has all of these famous comedians and people, some of them very traditionally clean comedians that don't usually say swears or anything like that, have some of the filthiest version of this joke you've ever heard. And it's the history of the joke. And for me, being a fan of stand-up, I had no idea what any of this was until the movie came out. A friend of mine saw it and said, you're going to love this. And I did. And I honestly haven't seen it in a long time. I may have to go back and see where I can find a copy of it. But I do remember one of the things that, like, the movie when it came out was quite controversial at the time. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that, one of the specific examples I remember that they were talking about in it was when 9/11 happened, there was supposed to be, correct me if I'm wrong here, I want to say it was like a stand-up benefit somewhere, and Gilbert Gottfried was one of the performers.
Yep.
And obviously, this is the day after all of this tragedy happened and all of these deaths, and the world and America are like in this grief-stricken horror of, oh my God, what's happening in the world around us? And here you've got a comedian who's going to try and be funny, and like you said, reads the room and realizes there is nothing I can say that is going to make these people laugh.
No, he made an airline joke. And
was that what it was?
Yeah, the audience turned on him
immediately. Yeah,
and they were like heckling him and booing him, and so he was like, what am I going to do? I'm out on stage. So he immediately went into the Aristocrats joke.
Yeah.
And the other comedians on the stage were dying laughing because they're like, oh my God, it's like he's letting the cat out of the bag.
Yeah.
And so he did this joke and people were like, what the hell were they all laughing at? What was that all about? And that's what led to the documentary. Because they were like, what was that joke all about? And the cat was let out of the bag that this was an inside joke with comedians. And that's kind of how it went down. I remember that.
Yeah. So if you haven't seen The Aristocrats and you're a fan of stand-up comedians, it is fantastic. So I'm just looking at the list now on the Wikipedia entry. There's got to be 200 comedians listed here that give their version or some version of the joke. And no, it's literally a who's who of stand-up comedy as of 2005 when this came out. So yeah, no, I realized as we started this conversation that I was like, oh my God, how did we possibly overlook this? Because I didn't know if it was going to be on your list since it was after 2000. So I thought I need to make an audible and throw it in there. So I'm putting it in as my number 3.
Love it. Great pick. Okay, so my number 3, I actually have a tie. Sorry. So I'm going to combine Carlin on Campus and Carlin at Carnegie. Okay, so good back in the 80s, and HBO released a bunch of comedy specials, and George Carlin did a whole bunch of them there, and they were released on VHS, and I had copies of both of these, Carlin on Campus and Carlin at Carnegie. So I couldn't pick between them. So there was no way George Carlin wasn't going to be on my list. So I decided to put them together. So they're both stand-up comedy shows. And just basically George Carlin on stage doing what he did best, which is making observations about the world, right? Mm-hmm. I always felt George Carlin was different. Like he swore a lot. I mean, hell, his famous routine was the 7 dirty words you can't say on television, right?
It's so good. It holds up so well. So how old it is.
But like Lenny Bruce that I was talking about before, George Carlin would talk about religion and politics all the time. And like, he wasn't just there to pick on people or make jokes. He really personified the idea of punching up.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, he was all about trying to take down those that were in power, those with authority, you know? Maybe take down isn't the right way. Like, he was only trying to call them out, you know, like question their power, question their authority. And his political and religious observations, they were some of the best seen. So in one, he's talking about conservatives and how they're against abortion, and then he's like, but once a child is born, these conservatives are like, screw you, you're on your own. And then he makes this observation about religion. He's like, religion is basically convincing people that there's an invisible man in the sky who watches over everything you do and has a list of 10 things you can't do, and if you do any of them, you're going to go to this special place filled with fire and burning and suffering and pain. But he loves you. He loves you, and he needs money.
Yeah.
It was just such a good routine. So those 2 George Carlin specials, the thing about them was they were really influential on me. I was a teenager, you know, as a young person trying to find my way in the world. And I came across these. I went to Catholic school as a kid. I went to Catholic high school as well. I was like always told what to do, how to act, what was expected of me. And then here I'm watching George Carlin telling me it's okay to question this stuff. You know, like I say, it was all very influential and really, really funny. So George Carlin was one of the greatest stand-up comics of all time. Top 3, I'd say for sure. So I put them together on my list.
Yeah, that's fair. And again, I think we're going to find a lot of the comedians, especially the ones on your list, because your list is probably going to have a lot more of the older comedians. Mm-hmm. There have been a lot of documentaries made about a lot of these people who were so influential. And George Carlin's another one. There was like, I think, a 2 or 3 part documentary that came out in the last few years about his life. Again, I knew a fair amount about him, but not nearly as much as I thought I did. I definitely had no understanding of sort of his roots, and that he really got to a point in his career and then made a complete change and decided, no, I'm going to do a different kind of performing now and tell different kinds of jokes. And so that was eye-opening to me. Just like you said, it's like, oh, you could do that? Okay, great.
I loved how he also would call out guys like Andrew Dice Clay. Mm-hmm. He called him out because he's like, Andrew Dice Clay punches down.
Yes.
You know, he goes after people that are marginalized and people that don't have a voice. And that's who Dice Clay goes after. And he's like, he's wrong. You got to go after the people that have power. Like, they're the ones you got to pull down. George Carlin was phenomenal. Man, he was good. Okay, so what do you got for number 2?
All right. That's a hard act to follow no matter who was on my list. Maybe I should have saved the Aristocrats for number 2. Yeah. That seemed like it was more of a better segue here. So, again, I've got 2 newer current working comedians in my 1 and 2. And these are just 2 of my personal favorites coming into the last 2 picks. So, again, Carlin, tremendously hard act to follow. Don't judge me on this one. But my number 2 is an American comedian, Nate Bargatze. He's often known as the Tennessee Kid, and that's the one that I want to talk about. It came out in 2019. His Netflix special is called The Tennessee Kid, and he's got a couple more that have come out since then. And he's one of the things that I like about him, and he's actually a clean comic. He doesn't swear. His jokes. Again, most comedians today don't tell jokes so much as they have humorous observations. So the kind of humorous observations and stories he tells are more about like his personal, his family life, and things about his growing up, his experiences growing up. And one of the things that I just found so funny about his story is that his dad was a professional magician. And so a lot of his stories growing up are around his dad being a professional magician and the craziness that was surrounding his childhood growing up that he just thought was, this is how things are. And it sort of gave him a unique perspective on the world when he realized, like, oh no, my dad as a stage magician is providing me with this sort of bizarre look on the world. And now as he's getting a little older, he's starting a family. So a lot of his material starts coming back to his family life, which again, I don't have kids, so some of that stuff I can't completely relate to, but he does have a whole thing in his act where he talks about his aging parents, which I could definitely relate to. And some of that stuff has been pretty funny, but he's got this really great bit about going into a Starbucks and ordering a coffee with cream and getting a coffee with whipped cream, and just like trying to explain to the barista that I said coffee with cream and she kept saying coffee whipped cream. And he's like, really, honestly, when was the last time someone walked into a Starbucks and asked for a coffee with whipped cream on it? And it just goes on and on about this misunderstanding. And that's sort of like one of his really big bits that comes up. He sort of references it in his follow-up specials. And he's got another bit where he talks about going to like an alligator museum, but it's like in someone's house. It's like these rednecks that have this alligator museum. And he's like, oh my God, please tell me these people are still alive. And so every time he does a new stand-up, he sort of references back to, let me tell you what's going on with this alligator museum and the tragedies that have occurred there, and just the outrageous hilariousness that ensues. But no, I find him really good. He's got a recent special that just dropped on Amazon, I think within the last year. And he's got a whole bit in his new one about a bet he made with his friends when they were golfing. And I'm not a golfer, but I'm a bettor, and most of my friends golf. And oh my God, it was so funny. I remember watching this when I was in the airport the last time I went on vacation, and I'm sitting in the airport waiting room waiting for my airplane, and I'm crying. I'm laughing so much. And my family's looking at me, they're going, what are you watching that's so sad? And I'm like, it's not sad, it's hilarious. It was just, I was beside myself. It was so funny. So Nate Bargatze, he's a working comedian. He's still doing new material. He's got 2 or 3 specials out. He's my number 2. All
right, so strap yourself in for this one. My number 2 is Richard Pryor, live on the Sunset Strip. Richard Pryor was something else. He was more of a force of nature than he was a person. So if we go back to 1974, Mel Brooks wanted him to play Sheriff Bart in Blazing Saddles. But he was too unreliable. And the studio wouldn't even insure him to be in that movie. But then he went on, he had this amazing stand-up career where he was basically the edgiest stand-up, since Lenny Bruce. And then Lorne Michaels got him to be the host of the 7th episode of Saturday Night Live's first season back in 75. They actually had to put a 7-second delay on the show because they were scared, right? That he would say something, he would, swear. And in that, oh my God, that episode was so good. He did this Exorcist sketch. And he did this word association sketch with Chevy Chase where he threw the N-word out there. And he threw the N-word into like American living rooms. Yeah. It was all about, for him, using that word as a weapon back at white people. Man, he was amazing. So, and the other thing he did, he used a lot of cocaine back in those days.
Yeah, no kidding.
And one night in 1980, he was freebasing cocaine and decided to pour rum all over himself and light himself on fire. So he had all these like massive burns on his face and his neck, but he survived. So then in 1982, he released Richard Pryor Live on the Sunset Strip, which is my number 2. So to this day, one of the most incredible stand-up comedy performances in history. And like the thing was, if you go back, like Richard Pryor was fearless on stage. He was like angry and he was loud and it was like he had all the power. But after he lit himself on fire and then he basically went on stage for this movie, he was something that he'd never been before, and that was vulnerable. And, you know, the thing is, as a stand-up comic, especially, you know, as Richard Pryor back then, you cannot have the audience sensing that you're weak or you're vulnerable. You know, they can just sense it, you know what I mean? And the first maybe half hour of this movie you're watching, and you can tell he's restrained, you know? And he's kind of building it up, and then he just starts going. And the last half of this movie is some of the most incredible stand-up I've ever seen. His ability to sort of lay out the black experience was unlike anyone else. Like, he would just cut to the bone. And like I say, the last half of this movie, he opens up and he starts talking about his drug addiction, how he almost died. And it's almost like this movie is like him coming back from the dead, you know, and resurrecting his career. It is one of the most gritty and truthful stand-up comedy I've ever seen done. So Richard Pryor, Live on the Sunset Strip, that's my number 2. What do you got?
Yeah, when I worked at Blockbuster in the late 90s, we had a very Blockbuster carried a very small stand-up comedian section because you got to think, back then, it wasn't like now where everyone's comedy is just available on a streaming service. They had to physically have a movie, which not a lot of comedians did. But Richard Pryor, obviously big name, and there was a lot of money to be made, and that was a theatrical release. It was available on home video, and it was rented out every single weekend. Like, I worked at Blockbuster for almost 3 years. I cannot remember a time when it wasn't constantly off the shelf. Like, it was so good, and people were so happy to come and just find it for the first time or rent it again. Yeah, no, it's every bit as good as you're saying.
Yeah. All right, your number 1.
My number 1. So my number 1 pick is my number 1 favorite comedian working right now is Tom Segura, and my pick is his 2018 Netflix special called Disgraceful. And he's got, I think, 5 or 6 specials out there now, and this one absolutely is the pinnacle. He peaked, and his last couple have been good, but they have not been as good as this one. This special is fantastic. So Tom Segura is he's an American stand-up comedy comedian. He's married to another comedian, Christina Pazitsky, I think is how you pronounce it, and he's best friends and has a podcast with another comedian, Bert Kreischer, who people may recognize even if they don't know his name. He's a stand-up comic. He's a little bit overweight, and he always takes his shirt off. That's part of his shtick. Like 5 minutes into his routine, he takes his shirt off. That's Bert Kreischer. Anyway, and they have a podcast, Two Bears, One Cave, which is hit or miss. Depends on how much you like Bert. Anyway, back to Tom Segura. He's fantastic. And again, much like when I was talking about Anthony Jeselnik, Tom Segura is filthy. He's like, you know how, well, maybe not everybody, but when I was growing up, I had some friends that were like, when you're a little kid, you just want to outgross your friends. You want to tell a gross story or tell a dirty joke, and it always has to be over the top and dirtier than the guy standing next to you. And like Tom Segura is just like that as a grown up. His jokes are filthy. They often come right from his real life, and he just finds the humor in it. This particular special, he has this whole bit about how when he was in college, and this would have been like probably in the early 90s, so we're talking pre-internet, where because he was a little overweight, a little balding, and had a beard, he looked a lot older than he was. And so he would go and buy pornography for the people in his dorm. And eventually it got to the point where he would have a shopping list of everybody's preference of what they wanted, and they would give him money and a shopping list, and he would go and buy pornography. And he basically, when he went to the local, like, dirty magazine store, the guy's like, you know what? I'm going to recommend you to a more specialized place. And he has this whole bit where he goes to this warehouse. It's like this porno warehouse, and it's some of the filthiest and funniest material I've ever heard. The very first time I heard this particular special, I had, although it's available on Netflix, I was just listening to it because I was actually shoveling snow in my driveway in the middle of winter, listening to this thing while I'm shoveling. I hurt my stomach laughing so much I couldn't finish shoveling the driveway. It was so funny. I had to come inside, and I'm like all hunched over and grabbing my stomach. My wife's like, "What happened? Did you fall on the shovel?" I'm like, "No, this comedian is so hilarious. I couldn't finish shoveling the driveway. My stomach hurt so much from laughing." And I've probably watched this stand-up special a dozen times, and I find it just as funny every time I see it. A couple of my friends have they enjoy this as well. And when we get together, we watch it, even though we've all seen it multiple times, and we still laugh together. I had a chance to see Tom Segura live a few months ago. He was doing a tour, and he was great. Again, I find some of his newer stuff maybe not as funny as some of his older stuff, but his special from 2018, Disgraceful, is one of the filthiest, funniest things I've ever heard in my life. I don't know if it's going to stand the test of time like Richard Pryor on the Sunset Strip, but oh my God. Anyone I know who comes to me and says, can you recommend a good stand-up? This is absolutely, without a doubt, always my number one pick. Tom Segura, Disgraceful.
Segura. Okay, I have to remember this because I don't know who this person is. Okay, my number one, I'm sorry to fudge here, but I have to go with a tie at number one. So
okay.
I can't decide between Delirious or Raw.
Okay, that's fair.
So I'm going with both.
Yep.
I wanted to get Eddie Murphy into the top of my list, and I was going to go with Raw as my number one because I grew up watching that one over and over and over. But I couldn't have this list without Delirious on it.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, so do I put Delirious down at number 3 and Raw at number 1? No, that's too many Eddie Murphys. I'm just two of them. So I got to space it out. I got to get the other guys in there. So I just decided to combine them into the top. I did that with George Carlin. So what the hell? At number 3.
Yep.
So these two stand-up specials are really different because in Delirious, you've got Eddie Murphy when he was just coming up, and it was a sensation. Like, it wasn't a theatrical release. It was an HBO special. Totally uncensored.
And I think it was unexpected. The success was unexpected from most.
Yeah, because he came out of nowhere and he says the F word in it 230 times. But it put him on the map, right? And audiences already got to know this guy a little bit because he was on Saturday Night Live. But this, Delirious, catapulted him into space. Like, he was swearing, he was talking about sex, he was doing impressions of celebrities saying and doing things that he never would have got away with on SNL. So it put him in a whole new light for audiences. And it really kicked off his career as sort of that R-rated comedy king of the 80s. But Raw was different because when it came out in 87, it was released theatrically. And it didn't take it very long before it became the most successful stand-up comedy film of all time because it beat out Richard Pryor, Live on the Sunset Strip. But it was different from Delirious because, like I say, Delirious, he was just coming up. But when Raw came out, he was at the height of his fame. He was this massive worldwide superstar in 87. So the film opens up with this pre-taped sketch about Eddie as a little boy telling a dirty joke to his family. And the kid that plays the little Eddie Murphy is none other than the kid that played Kenny on The Cosby Show, Rudy's friend.
Yep. And
then the stand-up routine starts. Eddie Murphy comes out on stage and he starts talking about how other black celebrities reacted to Delirious. And mostly he imitates Bill Cosby. You know how Bill Cosby called him up and he's like telling him not to swear. And,
yeah, you're too dirty.
And then he's impersonating Bill Cosby saying the F word too. And then he does this impression of Richard Pryor and Mr. T and Michael Jackson. And he, Jermaine, stop teasing. And he's like talking about sex and STDs and what it was like to grow up poor and not be able to afford the McDonald's burger. He's got the welfare burger. And then he's talking about getting in a fight with Denny Terrio from Dan's Fever.
Oh, yeah.
He's telling the story how he had to call his dad from jail and his dad was drunk. And he's trying to tell his dad, he's like, I got into a fight. I got a fat lip. I look like Jimmy Walker with my lips. And his dad's all confused. Like, you got in a fight. Eddie, you punched Jimmy Walker in the lips. I like good times. It was just so funny. But Eddie Murphy Raw, it's a little bit of an ego trip. I think you could really tell that Eddie Murphy was like the biggest star in the world. But he's just so good. Like, you realize how friggin' talented he was. Man, Eddie Murphy was something else. Like, he was a star. He was just amazing. And just the raw energy and power and everything that he had on stage, he was that good. So that's my number one. So Raw with like a side of Delirious for good measure.
Yeah, I was going to say, I went back and watched Delirious probably about a year ago, and talk about of its time. It does not hold, a lot of the content does not hold up because it is just so inappropriate by today's standards. But remembering it in the moment, because like I would have been 10 years old when that came out, and I remember hearing it, even though we probably weren't supposed to. I can remember watching it on video, and as a 10, 11, 12-year-old, so many of the jokes and so much of the humor went right over my head.
Right.
Because it talked about things like sex and things that I just didn't have the experiential framework to understand. So I can remember memorizing the jokes and telling my friends the jokes and not really understanding what I was saying or understanding why it was funny, but knowing, oh, I'm supposed to laugh at this point. And then years later, going back to watching, like, oh, okay, now I actually get the joke. And then going back more recently, watching it and being like, ooh, this is kind of tough to watch by today's standards. But again, it's like any other form of art, right? It evolves and changes with time. And as long as the performer isn't still doing that act now, you know, I want to say you can forgive them for doing it at the time. I mean, you probably shouldn't, but it was deemed edgy and racy at the time. And that's part of the reason they did it was, I'm going to do something to stand out from the crowd. And but no, yeah, like you can't. No one's going to fault you for putting Eddie Murphy number one on a stand-up comedian list. In fact, we probably get a lot of crap if he wasn't number one on one of our lists. So
I thought it was interesting too, with me doing all the older stuff and you doing all this newer stuff. One person that got lost in all this was Chris Rock.
Yeah, honestly, I was sort of considering Chris Rock, but then when I ended up doing Chappelle, I thought, well, they sort of occupied the same space a little bit at the same time, and I felt that Chappelle just overshadowed Chris Rock. Not that Chris Rock isn't though, deserving.
Like his what was it? Bring the Pain, and like he walks, he like paces that stage like a tiger. Like there's just something about him, this energy that he brings. He is just back and forth, and he is just bringing it. Like he was one hell of a talented guy, and his delivery and stuff. God, he was good. It just, like I say, got lost a little bit between us, but I do think we need to give him a shout out because he was. Yeah,
for sure. I love. I think it was in that special. He has a joke where he talks about how, white people and black people would never change spots with each other. Where he says, "There's a white one-legged janitor backstage," and I asked him if he would trade places with me, and he's like, "No, I'm doing okay." And he's like, "And I'm rich." And he's like, just to emphasize how much more important it is in America to be white rather than to have money. So
exactly,
it's he's not wrong, and it's a sad statement. It was true then, it's true now.
His observations were definitely good. All right, so on that note, what do you say that we have some
fun with Caveman?
All right, Derek, here's what we're gonna do. We're talking about stand-up comics, obviously. I'm gonna give you a quote from a stand-up act. All you have to do is name the comedian that said it. It sounds hard, but it's actually pretty easy, I think.
Okay. We'll see.
So I'm going to give you the quote. You mentioned the stand-up comic that said it. All right?
Okay.
Here's the first one. A house is just a place to keep your stuff while you go out and get more stuff.
That was George Carlin.
See, you got this, okay?
Yeah.
Gun control. We need bullet control. I think every bullet should cost $5,000 because if a bullet costs $5,000, we wouldn't have any innocent bystanders.
Yeah, that's Chris Rock.
According to most studies, people's number one fear is public speaking. Death is number two. That means to the average person, if you go to a funeral, you'd be better off in the casket than doing the eulogy. Who said that?
Is it Jerry Seinfeld?
Sure was. I've had so much plastic surgery, when I die, they'll donate my body to Tupperware.
Oh, that has to be Joan Rivers.
Yeah, see, you're doing really well. An escalator can never break. It can only become stairs.
Yeah, that's...
There should never be an escalator temporarily out of order sign. Only escalator temporarily stairs.
Yeah. Oh, my God. I know this guy. Mitch Hedberg.
Yeah. I made out with a homeless guy by accident. I had no idea. He was really tan. He had no shoes. I was like, he's probably in a band.
Jeez, I have no idea.
Amy Schumer.
Makes sense. It sounds like something she'd say. Yeah. Okay.
No matter how old you are, if a little kid hands you a toy phone, you answer it.
Oh, geez. I've heard that bit before.
Yeah.
It's Ray Romano, maybe?
It's your man, Dave Chappelle. Dave Chappelle said that. All right, here's a pretty easy one. I don't get no respect. My parents even hated me. My bath toys were a toaster and a radio.
Wow.
Great line.
Yeah, that was Rodney Dangerfield.
If at first you don't succeed, then skydiving definitely isn't for you.
Oh, jeez. I want to say that's one of my guys probably, but no, I don't know.
Stephen Wright said that.
Okay.
Wright.
Yeah.
All right, and here's an easy one that to round things out should be good. Fire is inspirational. They should use it in the Olympics. Because I did the 100-yard dash in 4.3. You know something? When you're on fire and running down the street, people will get out of your way.
Jeez, that's funny. I don't know who said it, though.
I told the whole story. It was Richard Pryor.
Oh, yeah,
I was
sorry.
telling the story because he lit himself on fire. And he came back and then told that whole story. Okay, so you did pretty good. See, thought it was hard, but they were actually pretty easy. So I tell you what, next time out, what about if we did another movie review? Now, I picked the last one. Do you want to pick one? We got to keep in mind, it's got to be a major milestone anniversary. So do you have something queued up you'd like us to go back and watch and then review?
Well, so I do. And we've been revisiting the milestones for the older movies. But from time to time, we want to dip into something a little newer just to try and, educate you.
Yep.
But as it so happens, the newer movie that I want to have you watch is actually celebrating its 5th anniversary. So a small milestone. And
really new, though, for me.
Really new. And I know you haven't seen it because I've asked you before and you said you have not. So we're going to return to the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Oh.
Remind me, I had you watch Iron Man. And Guardians of the Galaxy.
And Thor. And Guardians of the Galaxy.
Right.
Those are the only three. They're the only three films I've seen from the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Okay, well, we're going to have you watch the 2018 film Black Panther.
Oh.
And let me tell you, you do not have to have any context of the Marvel Cinematic Universe coming into this movie. It completely stands alone. It is fantastic. If you have the history of the Marvel Cinematic Universe coming into it, great. There's some stuff that's like, oh, yeah, okay, I know this, I know that. But the way the movie was put together, it's designed as an on-ramp for people who have not seen all the other movies. It's a very strong standalone film. You can watch it without any of the other stuff, and it's very satisfying. It's really good. Honestly, if you were to ask me what's my favorite movie that's ever come out of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Black Panther makes my top 3, no question. I don't know if it would be my number 1, but I could probably make an argument for it being my number 2. And we're talking 40 movies deep here, so that's saying something. But
what would be your number 1 out of curiosity?
I think it's got to be the first half of Infinity War. Like the final 2 Avengers movies, they split it into 2 parts. I think the first part of that is probably my number 1.
Oh, interesting.
But I don't know. The first Iron Man's really good too. But Black Panther definitely in that top 3. It's absolutely in the discussion. So,
and like you're saying, it's not connected to the other, because a lot of the other ones, like, they're all connected in and like stories overlap and all that stuff. But this one you can just watch alone, and I don't.
This one absolutely just watch without, and you don't have to know anything. They introduce all the important characters right at the beginning. You don't have to know like, oh, that guy was in that movie and what's he all about. No. It's I think you'll really find it easily to, like, it's an accessible movie for people who don't have that background.
Is this the guy that died too?
R.I.P. Chadwick Boseman. Yeah, we'll talk more about that next week. But anyway, give it a watch. Available on Disney Plus as part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And it was actually just recently on TV in the last couple of weeks. I had a chance to catch part of it, and it reminded me, I'm like, you know what? This movie's really good. I knew you hadn't seen it yet, so it's time to watch the Black Panther.
All right. So I will watch Black Panther. We will come back next time, and we will review it. And until then, I'm Chris McBrien. That's Derek Myers, and we're both saying thank you for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World. You can contact Chris and Derek at popgoesyourworld.com. Please take a minute and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.